what it used to look like when Lawrence was there. But I'm going to show you, probably for the first time ever, a picture of what it was like when he was living there, when he lived there. It's going to be converted into a resort, and the Russian gentleman has spent a lot of money, and he's making beautiful dry stone walls, which is marvellous. But unfortunately, the original footpath, he's managed to have it moved onto the sort of the border of the property. So there's the house and the land, which Lawrence had a beautiful garden there. The footpath has been put on the edge of the property. Sorry, let's put it on the edge of the property. Is that better? And he's paying a lot of money to the Comune to be able to do this. Yes, some people are nodding their heads, they know about this. I've forgotten now exactly, it's nearly 2 million euros. If you didn't know, you can look it up on the internet, I've forgotten the exact price. He gave this money to the Comune in their riches, so now they've got an enormous amount of money they can spend. In what way, I don't know. And he's moved the footpath, and he's built this wall in dry stone walling. The original footpath was a little stream. If you've ever been down to this beach, it was a very rough old path, and it wasn't kept very well. I know when I used to go there, and the stream, there was a trickle. It wasn't a sort of stream anymore, but there was the footpath. And the pink house, the Casa Rosa, I remember that the Comune in Lerici used to, Bert was a typical name. In fact, I had an Uncle Bert too in England. It's that sort of generation. It was a typical name at the beginning of the century, last century. Anyway, Ezechiele lived there, and he was the son of Samuele Azzerini. Giovanna is here, so she probably knows that there are people still living in Tellaro who are related to this family. It lived in the little Casa Rosa. Anyway, eventually, after many, many years, the Comune changed their ideas and realized that in actual fact, Lawrence has banned. His books were considered very obscene, and this was even before Lady Chatterley's Lover. Lady Chatterley's Lover, of course, is the most scandalous one, but that wasn't actually published until 1928, after the First World War. But even Netflix has put it. Yes? Yes. 2 days ago. Oh, 2 days ago. Oh, good, Dorothy. So you may be able to answer the question, the last question in my talk, Dorothy. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, but even his first books were considered pretty scandalous. You know, The Rainbow and Women in Love. They both got seized and blocked, and the first one even got burnt. All the copies were burnt by, you know, the British censors in those days. This is before the First World War. No, just after the First World War. Anyway, Lawrence, we all know, but you may not know this painter who's called Aubrey Waterfield, who lived close by. And he lived in this fortress, or he calls it a castle, which is the castle on top of the hill above Aulella, near where I live now. The castle is open, not at the moment because it's winter, but it's got a natural history museum. But on the first floor, we've dedicated most of the first floor to an exhibition called Gli Inglesi amano la Lunigiana. And it's about the English people who lived in this castle, and they lived there for nearly 70 years, a husband and wife, and I'll tell you all about them in a minute. So I'm going to talk about these two men, D.H. Lawrence and Aubrey Waterfield. So if you want to stop me and ask me any questions, do, and I'll do my best to answer. So on the I said, what's a slag heap? And he said, oh, it's the dust that comes, the coal dust that comes out of the coal mine, it's brought up, and then they put it in a heap so that it makes like a small hill, but it's dead triangular, and it's black. And then eventually the grass grows over it, and they hope that this mound is going to look like part of the landscape. And this, in fact, is one of the themes that Lawrence had. He hated the industrialization of the countryside, because this is what the countryside is like near Nottingham. It's very beautiful. It's known as the Peak District. And he began writing it, and was writing it when they were living on Lake Garda. And it's autobiographical. The young lad, Paul, is a miner's son, and it's very similar to Lawrence's own life as a young boy. This Paul is a bright lad. He falls in love with various girls in the story, in the novel. His father is a typical miner who just thinks nothing about his work, getting his money, getting drunk at the end of the week, and was a very... They're in their little house, their little terraced house in their little coal mining village. It's named, the terraces were named as and he came from a completely different social background. I won't say he was an aristocrat, because he wasn't. He came from quite a literary family, and they lived in this beautiful house, Nackington House, near Canterbury. And he was a brilliant painter. He went to our best fine arts school, which still is considered the best. Well, this isn't a typical castle because it's by the sea. You need to go inland. Why don't you come and see one of these other castles that I own? He was a collector of Maiolica vases and castles. Anyway, so they went, Aubrey went to see this castle at Aulella. And he was so impressed with this castle, he fell in love with the countryside, the panoramas of the mountains, and he thought it was just fantastic. And of course he ended up living there. So anyway, Aubrey arrived in Fiascherino with the poets, and as a consequence, Fiascherino with the poets, the Lawrences came to stay at the Fortezza. They arrived early on a December morning of glorious sunshine, the air crisp and sparkling, the mountains sprinkled with the first snows. We met them on the drawbridge, wanted to protect the two valleys of the river Magra and the river Aulella, could see who was coming up and down the valleys, because it was the passageway from the north of Europe to come down to Rome, and vice versa, when the Roman legions went up northwards and then took, and the river Magra is here. And you can see that most of the hill was actually cultivated in vineyards. There were grapes here. There were very few trees. But because it was inspired by the pavilion. Borders, there were ilex or holm oak trees, leleche, on the left, and on the right there were various flowers, a lot of roses. He loved roses. There was
family with their pleasant opulence. We enjoyed the rare charm of Lawrence's companionship. His passionate love of nature and enjoyment gave us both a sense of exhilaration. World War. This is not Aubrey's painting, but again, another painting by Helen Cochrane from Waterfield. And she remained friends with Waterfield. And eventually get on a boat back to England because it was getting too difficult for them to remain in the fortress in Aulella. They loved there, and then they went down to Sicily and lived at Taormina, and Lawrence continued writing poetry, letters, novels, travel books, Sea in Sardinia, Twilight in Italy, and then they went on their travels around the world. They left Italy, they went to Ceylon, Sri Lanka, they went to Australia. From Australia they went to Mexico. His lover, which is what Lawrence was writing. This was his last novel, okay? His last novel, and he published it. I'll talk about that in a minute. Here you can see Frieda, rather large now, and they went walking around the whole of Tuscany visiting Etruscan tombs, and he wrote sketches. He wrote this book, Sketches of Etruscan Places and Other Italian Essays. And in this book, the other Italian essays, I found an essay called Flowery Tuscany. This is the last little bit. See, I don't know whether you want me to read it or not. Maybe not, because it's an hour. But he writes this lovely essay that you might... Lady Chatterley's Lover, which was his last book. Now this is the first edition. Has anybody got one? Because it's worth $17,500 US, folks. Anybody got it? No. Pity, eh? Never mind. We'll look for it. It was published in Italy, in Florence. 1,000 copies. This was number 460. It's on sale at the moment, on internet. If you want, you can buy it. It's quite an investment. And the flower, Dorky, you said you saw it in the garden, and it's now going to be a super duper expensive resort, and I expect, being Russian owned, I don't know whether Italians will go and stay. It's not finished yet, but those of you who live in Tellaro, is Giovanna here? Giovanna? Yes. No, you're not back. Right, another big basket the other side there near the fireplace, but she did all these baskets of flowers to illustrate the opening of the exhibition this summer. The exhibition is still open, and there's a second room. Everybody, I think I've taken 7 minutes more.